Yeah, thanks for joining my session, in which I'm going to talk about, well, what it says, that's already productivity and well-being in open source. It's a non-technical talk, and let's explore what this is about. Actually, the first part of the talk isn't about open source at all. It's about dangers of too much work and burnout, too many tasks, constant sense of overwhelm that some of us experience in our daily work, and then let's see how this applies to open source. So this is British economist and philosopher John Maynard Keynes, and his ideas fundamentally changed the theory and practice of macroeconomics and the policies of governments. And so he said in 1930, by 2030, people will only work 15 hours a week. Why? Because of advances. Are you laughing because of the quote, or because? Okay. Why? Because of advances in technology and wealth. And the reality is probably a little different. At least for me, I can say that we are working more than ever, and technology is helping, but also adding extra tasks to our work. So his prediction in 1930, that was only 1 year after the Great Depression of 1929, when the stock markets crashed, and the only thing that was soaring were the soup kitchens and bread lines, and a lot of people were unemployed. But so Keynes said, well, the Great Depression is just an economic blip that will go away after a short time. And what's going to happen is the economy will boom again soon, thanks to scientific and economic industrial development. We will have a nice standard of living. It will improve dramatically. The attitude towards work will change over time radically, and the code of morals will actually change. Money is not a purpose in itself. So Keynes thought that the pursuit of money for its own sake is actually a pathological condition, and that the proper aim of work is to provide leisure. And he wanted shorter working hours and longer holidays for everyone. And so people will just earn enough money in just a few hours a week, and the rest of the time will enjoy life and be able to engage in kindness and civic participation. So, 1930, 2030, we're not quite there yet, but basically, this is the utopia in which we live in right now. So, are you enjoying your 15-hour work week? This is a full-time assignment, 15 hours, I mean, if you're part-time, maybe that is actually your... But who has a 15-hour full-time work? Yeah, obviously, that's what I thought. All right, historically, a lower income meant more working hours. That makes sense, right? You got to make ends meet, so you need to work more time. Today, it's the higher paid individuals that put in more working hours and more time stress. So Keynes' prediction, so the thing about predictions is they're very hard, especially when they concern the future, right? And so he was right about higher standard of living, absolutely, than 100 years ago, for sure. Advances in technology, also for sure. We have so many nice and fun gadgets. We have smartphones, we have smart TVs. I have a smart dishwasher. I can control my dishwasher through the internet and also my vacuum cleaner. Yeah, so these things are helpful and they take away stress. So this is actually really nice. And we definitely do have a higher income. But he was very wrong about working hours. Americans work on average 10% more than they did in the 1970s. Germans, for industry workers, the working hours actually have gone down, but for knowledge workers, like most of us, I would assume has gone up. Now, let's look at what the causes of the discrepancy are and what the impact on our well-being might be. So a lot of us, so that's for me, I feel very busy and I have endless to-do lists, and I have fantasies of getting to the end of these to-do lists at some point and finally take a breather, click the last thing on the to-do list. Finally, I can rest, And how do I manage? How do I try to get to the end of my to-do list? I double down on my busyness. I get even more busy. I go through the list as quickly as possible, which results usually in long working hours. And I multitask where possible. If I have a Zoom call and it's not a one-on-one, then yeah, I'm working on emails. Who does that? Anybody? Yeah, thank you. Okay. Also, so we're on an endless quest to optimize this overloaded schedule, and it gives us an increased sense of overwhelm. Everything needs to be done fast as possible. Everything is urgent, and even in leisure time, So I'm done with my busy workday. I sit down on the sofa. I'm like, okay, what do I do next? Wait, I have a private to-do list as well. I need to do this and that, and okay. So also, when I'm in a work day, my meeting is over 10 minutes before the scheduled time. I'm like, yes, I have 10 minutes. Okay, what do I do with the 10 minutes? I can water the plants. I can clear the dishwasher. No, wait. Let me answer 3 emails in this time. 10 minutes, I can do 3 emails, yeah? And then, of course, the second email takes a bit longer, and then I'm late to my next meeting, even though I was done early. Okay, I see. Thank you for the nods, because it gives me, I'm not alone, okay? All right, and so what a miserable way of living your life, Instead of 10 minutes, I can just maybe sit down and notice the world around me, or really take a breath. Yeah, no, not happening. So what do? So we attend seminars, how to be more efficient and enhance your productivity. Who has attended such a seminar at some point? Okay, a few of you, thank you. He was like, don't want to admit it. We have tools to support our personal organization. There's even something, Kanban is a really nice tool, but there's even something called personal Kanban where you can organize your personal tasks. Yeah, and so it's another list of tasks. And so maybe you actually get more efficient. Fine. And one colleague even suggested to me, well, you have so many things to do, you just need to prioritize your tasks. I'm like, oh, no shit, Sherlock. Why haven't I thought of that myself? Thank you. Okay. So, but what happens? Anything you try to do to use your time more effectively by becoming more efficient seems to be a fairly general law that what will actually end up happening is that you get a lot busier and more stressed, right? The sort of abstract way of talking about this is that if you make a system capable of processing more inputs, then it will just attract more inputs, right? The reward for good time management is more work. Exactly, so if you need something done, here's the saying here. I don't know if you saw this, but this is, if you need something done, give it to a busy person because they know how to manage it efficiently, right? And this is, author Oliver Burkeman called this the efficiency trap. So what is the efficiency trap? For example, email. If you get really good at answering emails fast, you will get more emails because people will reply to your replies and you have to reply to those again. Same happens with projects. If you're getting really good at working certain projects, then you will just get more of these projects. Oh, give it to this guy. He's really good, yeah. And so we attempt and we try to get everything done, but the supply is infinite, yeah? And so we just get busier and busier. And this is there's also overwhelmed by potential experiences, especially if you live in a city like Berlin. You can do so many things. You can go to the theater, there's this band is in town, and I can go to a Berlin match, I can go to soccer, I can go to hockey, I can do everything. And it's like, oh my God, I'm sitting on my couch in the evening, I'm missing out. I need to do something, yeah? So this really carries over into your personal life as well. Oops. So
we're ending up in a permanent state of overwhelm, and this is partially our own fault. Really? Partially our own fault. Why? Well, because we at least collaborate with the situation. What do I mean by that? So there's an infinite amount of things to do, and what is our approach? We're like, yes, all right, bring it on then. Let's figure out a way how to do infinite amount of things. No problem. So we are busy all the time and doing an infinite amount of things. Also, being busy all the time makes us sometimes maybe feel a little bit important, right? Maybe our self-worth is wrapped up in productivity, so busy means I'm in demand. I don't know, a lot of times people ask me, so, Wolfgang, how are you doing? I'm like, I'm good, I'm so busy. I just wish I wasn't so busy all the time. And everybody's like, oh, yeah, I know what you mean. Same here. Who does that? I'm so busy. Yeah, okay, thank you. I'm so busy, right? So we collaborate with this. So busyness, maybe even a status symbol, possibly, could be. And so the Pulitzer Prize winning novelist Marilyn Robinson, she said, the spirit of the times is one of joyless urgency. Yeah, not so nice, huh? Why is that? So going into the Industrial Revolution, people started to think of time as a resource. And that means if you don't use this resource in a productive way, you're actually wasting it. You don't want to waste resources, of course. Up until about the mid-20th century, we had a really clear, well-defined definition and measures of productivity. For example, let's talk about agriculture. You know, here's a amount of land, and you could measure the bushels per area of land under cultivation. You make changes to how you grow the crop, and then at the end you can see, is my productivity going up or down? Same with industrial parts manufacturing. You know, if you change something and you make more or less parts, you can measure that. Okay, but now the thing is, these days, a lot of our jobs are actually kind of weird. Yeah? And what I mean is knowledge work. And so I guess a lot of us here are knowledge workers. And so supervising factory workers on an assembly line is fairly easy. You know, you figure out how to test build a widget, and you tell your employees, hey, make it like this, and if you make it like that, this will happen, and so forth. But this doesn't actually hold true for knowledge working. So what knowledge work is, I guess you know what it means. It's basically, you know, we create useful goods and services through our thoughts. So scientists, doctors, writers, attorneys, podcast hosts, or people giving a talk in front of an audience, right? How do you measure the productivity for such a task? So if I create slides for this talk, how do I measure my productivity? Is it the amount of slides that I produce? Is it the amount of words on a slide, or the amount of pictures, or what is it? You know, so obviously it's very, very hard to measure. Hours per decibel. That's okay. That's a good one. Yeah. So you don't know. So a typical knowledge worker also works on many different tasks at the same time, more or less. You don't just work on one thing. You work on this and that and so forth. What I'm working on differs on what my colleague from the same team is doing, and also supervising knowledge workers' work is more difficult because knowledge workers know more about what they do than their supervisors, right? Also, autonomy is a very large part of knowledge work, more than factory work or agriculture. So here, this is, so what happened was that in order to determine whether knowledge workers are putting in a useful effort, managers came up with a very problematic alternative called pseudo-productivity. So it's a very crude heuristic for measuring the work output. So it means, I'm not exactly sure what you're working on, so I'm going to use visible activity that I can see in order to determine your output and if you're actually being productive. So the more I see you doing things, the more productive you are. Very obvious, right? So that was hard until the 2000s, but then with digital technology, it completely spiraled out of control. Because now, with digital technology, you can leave a trace of your working or not working by, for example, emails or messages in Slack channels, right? So now there's an infinite amount, a supply of work, and there's also something called zero friction assignments. I have a task, and I can just pass it on to you. Boom, it's off my plate, and now it's your problem. Okay, so that goes very easy, and you're overwhelmed even more because you have another task to do. So email, Slack channels, team meetings, group texts, all of that. And managers be like, hey, I really haven't seen you in the email chains recently. You weren't in the Zoom meetings. You are slow to respond to the Slack chat. What's going on? Maybe you're not being productive. So that's a bit of a problem, right? So there, with digital technology, more and more opportunities to show off visible activity and more opportunities to monitor productivity, okay? At the same time, it's not just the managers. They weren't the only ones to embrace this notion of pseudo-productivity. Knowledge workers also internalized this notion, for example, of inbox zero. Okay, I want to get all this off my plate, so I'm working on emails, and then every email goes away. And then I'm in the chat after hours, You don't know that I'm working deeply on an article or a presentation because that leaves no trace. But if I'm jumping on an email thread, that does leave a trace, right? So also, sometimes working on an article or something else is hard, and I have to think about this, and it kind of goes up and down a bit, right? So I jump onto emails. One thing is like notifications. Okay, so I'm working on an article, and there's a ding. Oh, I have an email. Let me check my email. So we get distracted a lot, and obviously when you jump to an email, then whatever you were doing is in the back of your head. You're concentrating on email, and you're like, okay, good, I'll maybe do that or later, but I'm already distracted, and it takes me some time to get back to my actual work. So now we all know that, and I have turned off the sound notifications of emails. Okay, fine. But now what happens is I'm working on an article or a presentation, and then I'm like, oh, I haven't checked my emails in 10 minutes. Maybe something important came in. Let me see. And again, I'm distracted. I don't even need the ding anymore. I'm doing that to myself, right? And so this obviously impairs work productivity, and the stress levels are increased. And this is also not very helpful for my happiness. Yeah, because you're also always stressed. And Oliver Burkeman, he came up with this idea. He said, a lot of people wake up in the morning with this sort of productivity debt. So if we don't have a certain amount of things, we haven't. If we don't do a certain amount of things, then we haven't justified our existence. And so the best that can happen to us is if I wake up with a debt. The best at the end of the day is that I'm at zero. That's not really cool. It should be the other way around. I start at zero and then I add up. Yeah. Okay. So one day I achieved inbox zero. This is a screenshot from my iPhone. Now, if you look at this, I think there are at least two things completely wrong with it. One says, all done for the day. This is implying if I have no more emails, I actually have no more work to do. I'm done for the day. Okay? As if emails was the only thing you're working on. And the second one, enjoy your empty inbox. So an empty inbox is something to strive for, and you have achieved it, now you can enjoy it. Yeah, for 10 minutes, if you're lucky, and then ping. Okay, so this is the situation. What can we do? There are many things. attending a seminar maybe on productivity. But so here's something that computer scientist and author Cal Newport suggests. I mean, so there are many ways of dealing with the situation, but here's one. Thank you. So doing fewer things at once, working at a more natural pace, and obsessing over the quality of your work. Let's see what that means. When you take on a task, remember that every task comes with an administrative overhead. Writing a report that you say yes to is not just writing the report. There's a lot of emails back and forth, a lot of meetings, and let's talk about this report and so forth. And there's also cognitive brain space taken up. You know, if you take on a task, some part of my brain wants to work on that. And so that's kind of occupied. So, and if you take on more and more tasks, the administrative overhead is piling up. You have less time to actually work on these things. And your calendar starts to get broken up by so many meetings and appointments and so forth, which Cal Newport calls productivity termites. I have a lot of these in my calendar. And you fall behind, and the solution is to reclaim working time outside of work hours. Again, you know, adding to the stress and so forth. So he says, don't take up too many things at once. And doing fewer things at once is not the same as doing fewer things overall. As a matter of fact, I think you, at the end of the year, maybe you will probably have more things that you have done. But maybe you're a bit more sane. Second, work at a more natural pace. So, you know, so knowledge work isn't just a straight line of working. It's kind of has, you know, you're being more productive and less productive. So it kind of goes a bit up and down. Here, this guy, Georg Christoph Lichtenberg, he said, one should never be so busy that they have no time to think. And that's, you know, I noticed for me, that's exactly what's happening. I'm just there and constantly doing things, and I don't feel in control, and I don't have time to think. And so Cal Newport suggests something that's called small seasonality. You know, our Neolithic ancestors back in the day, when wintertime came around, they had to take a break. You know, you can't work on the fields in winter. We don't do this anymore, obviously, but maybe you should, I mean, think about taking a Monday, take no appointments on Mondays, you know, and then you start the week with a day where you can actually work on things. That's easier said than done, but I mean, give it a try, or do it on Wednesday or Friday. Okay, so that's what that means. And yeah, work at a more natural pace. And then the third one is here, obsessing over the quality of what you do. So care about the quality. This does not mean be perfectionistic about it, yeah? But do your work to the standard that you're comfortable with. Because what happens is when you do faster and faster, you know, you deliver work that you're not happy with. That's a mismatch of the values, because I want to be really good. And that can lead to cynicism and overwhelm. And that's, I mean, there are many factors, but that's one that can actually lead to burnout as well. Yeah. You put your full passion and energy into what you think matters for you. Okay? And this is another important and, yeah, kind of painful realization. Our time is limited. We know that, but we don't take the consequences. The consequence could be we must become intentional about what we choose to do and not take on everything else. Constant multitasking is definitely not a good way to spend your time. Oliver Burkeman came out with a book called 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals. And he says each of us has about 4,000 weeks to live when you get to about 80. When you're 40, that means you have 2,000 weeks left. And when you're 50, you probably have about 800 weeks left of working time. How do you want to spend those weeks? I know it's painful, but yeah, so think about that. All right, and so lastly now, let's see how this can be applied to open source. There's pseudo-productivity in open source as well. You know, there's a lot of visible activity that we might take as measures for productivity, commits, PRs, and issue tracking, lines of code. Don't misunderstand this. There is real value in the lines of code that you write, but don't use it as this value is the productivity count. Okay. There is the danger of burnout is there as well. Constant availability and the pressure to always be productive, and don't forget, a lot of open source projects, people are just doing this as a side job or as a hobby or voluntary work. All right, and now somehow I skipped something. Oh, I skipped this. Sorry. Open collaboration. There's somehow the expectation that developers will voluntarily invest many hours. Solutions will appear magically. Oh, just give it to open source and somebody will do the work. And constant availability, I already said this. And the ideal notion in the open source world is everybody collaborates and projects magically progress quickly. But in reality, there are all these deadlines and so forth. And then efficiency trap is also there. The good and efficient developers will take on more and more tasks. So this slide we already had. You probably remember this. This is 2014, the Heartbleed bug. And this is a critical part of our infrastructure, OpenSSL. And then for the first time, it was looked into, who are these people that are maintaining this? And it turns out it's these two Steves, and they are just overworked and underpaid, and they're completely overwhelmed. So this isn't a new phenomenon, of course, especially in open source. And slow productivity, you could. So here's some suggestions. Please focus on significant improvements, not on visible activity. Community management is really important. A lot of times overlooked, but please focus on building and maintaining a supportive and inclusive community, because that's really a stronghold, like, a strong family, strong community here. Set clear priorities and communicate them transparently, which helps to focus, and prioritize quality, like, code reviews, testing, and documentation. Okay. What else? Accept that not everything can be done at once. Set realistic goals. Say no to things. And this year, don't forget this. Open source developers are usually very passionate about what they do. And so, they write a feature or a bug fix, and then they're like, I wrote this great feature, and here it is, can you please review it? And you're like, yeah, looks okay to me, but I haven't the time, and yes, probably fine, yeah. And you've just disappointed someone who's really passionate about their work, so don't do this, be really nice and appreciative. That's what I mean when passion can add to stress, because you're very passionate and people will not appreciate your work. So please be nice and appreciative, especially in open source. So to wrap this up, you can also maybe sponsor open source projects. So if you're industry, by providing maintenance, by asking your people to collaborate and contribute back. We at Mercedes do this, and we also sponsor open source projects financially. So it's about appreciation and giving back. That's the most part, and about saying thank you to the open source community, and also to help ensure that these projects that are critical for our infrastructure, that they're still around tomorrow. We have the Mercedes-Benz FOSS Manifesto. Some of you may have heard of that. It's a set of rules and guidelines which don't only allow our open source, our developers to participate in open source, but actually actively send them on that mission and say, hey, please be active in open source and help. Don't just use, but also contribute back. And there are several principles. And here's, for example, it says Mercedes-Benz will support developers in open source in your working time, obviously, and it encourages the engineers to please go and be active and help out in order to prevent maybe burnout for some of open source projects. Yeah. All right. And if you are curious, here you can find on our open source landing page, you can find some stuff, and the manifesto would be right here. And that's basically it. I just want to say here, thank you to, this is a podcast I like to listen to. It's called The Happiness Lab with Yale professor Dr. Laurie Santos. And I took, for this talk, especially the first part, of course, a lot of inspiration from some episodes there. So I recommend this. I really like it. I think it can be very inspiring. I hope you find my talk a little bit inspiring too. And so thank you for being here, and may there always be wind in your hair. Ta-da.